Hello, and welcome to another episode of Meet the Music. I am your host, Thomas Corley. If you have grown up in the city of Detroit like I have, there are four things that are prevalent in the city of Detroit. There are four sports teams. We are fortunate enough to have all major sports: football, basketball, baseball, and hockey. But when you listen to the radio, in particular urban radio, there were four key people as I was growing up. There was Donnie Simpson, there was Mojo, there was John Mason. Now, our guest here has something over all of those guys. One, she's a female, so that's key there. Two, she's a PhD. None of those guys has a PhD. None of those guys are doctors.
Okay.
And she's an expert in her field. Dr. Deborah Smith Pollard. She has a ton of accolades, a ton of hats that she wears, but the ones that I like to follow you up on are author, educator, Emmy winner. She is our first Emmy winner. We've got Grammy winners we've spoken to, but she is our first Emmy winner. She's a host and producer of her own radio show. Of course, meaning she's a radio personality. She has a Stellar Award. But the key thing is that she's an ambassador. She's an ambassador for gospel music. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Deborah Smith Pollard to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Corley, for inviting me.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. I forgot to mention the name of the book. The name of the book that she's written is called When the Church Becomes Your Party, Contemporary Gospel Music.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with the history.
Well, let's just say, as I would always tell my students in the introduction to gospel music class, that if someone were to come and snatch you from this space today and you couldn't take anything with you, not even an overnight bag, you would still have certain things and they would finally come to it. You'd have your own voice. You'd have that music that's inside of you, your love of certain kinds of rhythms, your love of certain kinds of movement, and that would come with you. And so when these individuals from Africa were enslaved and brought to this so-called new world, they brought that with them. And even though there were restrictions on, certain kinds of things, how many of them could gather together because people were afraid that they were going to mutiny and run away and on and on and on. When they got together, they would sing what was inside of them over time as they were adapting English, and listening to some of the other sounds around them. They kind of combined those sounds and created many of the early forms of what we now think of as the early spirituals. As they were working in the field, they were out there from sun up to sundown and sometimes longer than that. And so, rhythm in order to keep yourself going during that day that you couldn't run away from, not like people were allowed to take naps or anything. So they would have this music that would help them to kind of coordinate their movements as they were working in the fields or doing other kinds of work. And so this music came to be. And as they were exposed to Christianity, many of them continued to hold on to the religious traditions that they already had within them, but many of them adapted Christianity. And I say adapted because they brought their own rhythms and their reinterpretation of songs, and then their creation of songs. And so eventually, as we are allowed to move out of enslavement, they start moving into cities and towns that are north and west, and they wanted newer sounds. And so some of them built upon what was created during slavery. So we got the Jubilee singers who are taking the sound of classical music, but the sound that many of them had even sung when they were enslaved. A lot of people don't remember that many of the Jubilee singers had been enslaved individuals as well. And this is how we get the music that we now call the classical sounding, if you will, the Negro spirituals that we sing now in churches during Black History Month and other times. But those were not what they were singing when they were in the field, but they combined that again. So this is what happens when anybody leaves one place and goes to another place. They often reinterpret what they have, move it into that new format. And so they did that. And then we also get these, what I call these cousin music forms, jazz,
Okay.
blues, and gospel come together. And so when people get angry, it's like, oh, that sounds too jazzy, that sounds too blues. We were all in this community together. And even though, even when we talk about some of our contemporary artists, whether they are the Clark sisters or the Winans or whomever who were told you can't listen to that other music, you're going to hear it when you're walking down the street in Detroit. You know, if you live around the corner from people who sing at Motown, or if you are just going to church and you have I should say to school, and you've got a choir director who is uh, introducing you to different sounds, you may want to bring some of those sounds into it. And so this is kind of how we get to this. And so those early sounds of gospel that some people are, oh my goodness, that was just so over the top. Well, you know, we had people like Thomas Dorsey who was playing, you know, with Ma Rainey and folks like
Right.
that. And he brings those the combination. He's a pastor's kid, so he brings some of that music with him, and he kind of combines that after he hears a singer, the last name Nix, and he's like, I want to do that. And you know, there are people who are unhappy because I always laugh and say, how do you know that this is street music if you only live in the church? Well, it's because you don't live in the church, you live in the world. So you hear all these different sounds. The other thing that's amazing to me, Mr. Corley, is this: it's that whatever people think is just unsacred and unholy, just give them 20 years. And then all of a sudden, that's what church is supposed to sound like. How come they moved on? So it just continues to move because the culture continues to move. You know, we embrace new rhythms, new instrumentation. At one point, the Hammond organ was considered to be the devil's instrument. Now people, oh my goodness, I miss that Hammond B3 organ. I'm like, well, back in 1930, when they brought that in the 30s, you were like, oh my gosh, that is so horrible. That's the instrument. So it happens. And so, you know, whether it's Dorsey who was pushed back against because of his sounds, or we talk about when Edwin Hawkins comes around, or even earlier than Edwin Hawkins, you know, to our Sister Rosetta Tharpe, you know, that's not a
Yes, yes, yes.
sound, you know. Then we get to Edwin Hawkins, who was pushed back against, how dare people dance to this music. I mean, it's like, well, I thought we weren't supposed to just sing to each other. I thought we were supposed to sing to the world and let them know that we love God and God loves them. Then we get to Kirk Franklin and on and on. So it just continues. And so all we have to do is just grab your popcorn and look around. It's going to continue to happen. That's just what happens all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So that's so key. I mean, well, let me hold for here for a second. I usually ask my guests the question of how they got into it, how they got into the genre, how did they get into their heads. But you
My
being
parents,
a pastor, your father and your mother was a musical minister, minister of ministry,
uh-huh.
right? Is that correct? Your
She was
mother?
in music, yeah, for years,
Yeah.
but she also played first for the city of Detroit as a pianist, and then for, 30 years, she was with the Detroit Public Schools, including being the accompanist for James Tatum at Murray Wright for,
Oh
like,
wow.
15 or 20 years. So, you know, she always knew all kinds of music, and so as we were growing up, we heard everything in our house.
Okay.
Everything. I love Broadway music. I try to go to New York at least once a year if I can, so I can just go to the musicals and the
Right.
plays and just take it all in. But we were exposed to all kinds of music, and so that's where I got all of that. But gospel stuck out to me. I love gospel, you know, and
Right.
that's why I ended up doing my doctoral dissertation on gospel announcers. You know what we do, why it matters, and and because I've been blessed to be able to work in radio. This is for the last 2.5 years. This has been of all of my more than 35 years in radio. For the last 2.5, I've had a co-host on Mix 92.3, Glenda Curry and I, and it's called Sunday Morning Inspiration. And so people wonder, well, how could you work with somebody else? You learn how to do that. And we actually have fun on Sunday morning
Yeah, right.
because, we combined, personalities. And it turns out that as different as people thought we were, we have a whole lot in common in terms of the music we love. So yeah, it works out pretty well.
Yeah. So have you ever, or is there anyone out there now who's kind of like the Casey Kasem of gospel music, doing like top 40 list or doing a list or anything like that?
Oh, but there are so many different platforms for everything now.
Right.
So I couldn't even narrow it down to just one because it's funny, without naming any names, I promise. Let's just
Right.
say on any given Monday, I can get 6, 7 emails to say so and so is number one. Well, you can be number one on the gospel airplay, or you could be number one on streaming, or you could be number one on downloads, or you could be number
Oh, yeah.
there's
Right.
so many different ways of looking at it, and there's legitimately number one in those particular areas. And so, is there any one person? I mean, we have several syndicated programs right now. That people listen to, like Willie Moore Jr. and Erica Campbell. They're the certainly two of the nationally syndicated programs. But turns out because everybody can go through podcasts outlets and listen. So we've got people who listen to us here in Detroit when they're
Right.
over in New York and Atlanta, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's a lot of ways that people can access the music, and heaven knows if you don't stop by YouTube, you can miss a lot, because something may not show up initially as number one or as the number one streaming or downloaded or, whatever. You can find out that there's something online that just got 750,000 views in the last week and a half. So
Right.
you got to kind of click around and find that as well if you want to be on top of what's going on in gospel right now.
Right. Yeah. So what was the spark for you to write your book?
Oh, well, first of all, because I was an academic, and in order to at a university campus where if you are going to move from assistant to associate or from associate to full, you're always having to research. So I had done articles certainly on gospel music, but because I both do it on Sunday morning, that is play music on Sunday, but I'm also researching it. And people are like, but you teach literature, right? I do. That means I pay attention to the lyrics in gospel music and how people utilize them, right? How they express themselves. And so that was part of it. And then there were just things. I was the producer for the McDonald's Gospel Fest for the entire time that it existed here in Detroit. In fact, Detroit was the first city that had the McDonald's Gospel Fest. And then when my business partner at the time, Mike Watts, and I decided we would do something called the Praise Fest. In fact, we had the community actually name it. It was called the Motor City Praise Fest. We just had all this. And I started noticing the clothing was changing. So we were at Shane Park and or at Hart Plaza. It could be 90 degrees. We still had to wear high heels, pantyhose, hats, full dresses. And then I started noticing a change. And even though people know that I'm grown, they could not believe how happy I was that we didn't have to wear all of that and all of that. But more importantly, I was listening to how others were responding to those changes. And so that's how one of the chapters of the book, which is my favorite chapter title, Muscle T-shirts, Tight Jeans, and Cleavage, Wrapping the Gospel for a New Generation, because all of a sudden I went from hearing people saying, now, if she had had a dress on, people would have responded, to looking around and seeing at one particular concert, let me see, maybe I won't even try to say the specific year it was, but let me just say, I know the people who were performing, and only one of the four leading ladies in gospel had on a dress that time. And I remember one of my mentors said to me, they were raised better than that. And if they and I said, "May I type while you talk?" So I typed what she had, and then I called one of the performers who did not have on pants and just asked. And you know what? It's in the book, so I can say it was Vicky Winans. And I didn't tell her what the other person had said. And she said, I was raised in a particular church where we could not even wear pants, to picnics or anything. She said, I was 30 before I wore pants. And she said, but I have been set free. And I Whereas the other one said, had she been set free, she wouldn't have had pants on. And I said, I was in full research mode at that point, because these are two women who both love God and love gospel music, but they had very different opinions,
Right.
very different opinions about what one should look like. So that's how that particular chapter, and then the one about praise and worship, that was, people would like to think, well, why would anybody push back? Again, you would think, well, it would only be against something like what Kirk Franklin was doing, or Mary Mary. No, there were people who really disliked, or now say, even take the D off, some people who dislike, even to this day, praise and worship music. And so I just wanted to talk about, where did that form that we think of as starting in the contemporary Christian music, which means the white gospel community, how did that move into the Black community? So I wanted to write about that. And that's been, that chapter has been republished in a couple of other books.
Yeah.
As of what, I'm just saying, Thomas Whitfield helped to bring us into it. But many others, Israel Houghton and many others helped to usher us into that particular world. So that's how that one came about, because of what I listen to, because of what I play, and because of how I try to watch what we're doing. So there are days in church where even in virtual church, where I have to remind myself, are you a worshiper right now? Or are you doing an academic thing? Because I will see something happen in the middle of service and go like, how did that get to be a congregational song? Turn your brain off. Don't pay attention.
Right.
But that will happen. And sometimes I'll just make a quick note and say, okay, try to focus. Try to be a worship for a minute,
Right. Yeah. I do have to do that sometimes, because I have to say, I don't know. I grew up in a small church. My grandfather had a small church, and we never had contemporary gospel music. I think I discovered it maybe when I got to camp, Bible camp, is when I kind of got exposed to it. And I think one of the ladies in our church, who was the ministry leader, and I think she tried to introduce it. I don't know what happened. And then, of course, I became an adult, went into the Navy, and then came back, to Michigan after I was around the country, around the world. And then now I'm a part of the Triumph Church with Pastor Kinlock. And so now I know, but I've gotten to the point where I have to remind myself, I'm going here for spiritual feeding. And I have to forget about all the other stuff going on around me.
Exactly. It's amazing. I'm a member there too, and so I understand. It's not necessarily who's on the stage, but it's also what's going on around you at that time.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Right.
Dancing like they're in the club, and I'm like, don't pay attention. Don't pay attention. Don't. It's like, just trying to look at all of the things that are going on, because both sides of my brain start operating.
Yeah. So that conversation you were having with the Whining sisters, and maybe possibly, yeah. So is that? Do you think, in your observation and your research, was that regional?
No.
Or is that the whole country at this point?
Well, no, I would just say there are plenty of, if you mean about some people who are not allowed to wear pants, it depends on your denomination, but it also depends on your particular church. There are still churches to this day that will not allow women to wear pants in church. Okay.
Well, no, no, not necessarily the church, but I mean, not the dress, but I mean, as far as pushback, the pushback on the music.
Oh yeah, it's across the country. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There are just some people who don't like certain sounds. And so we can even go back to Andre Crouch. That wait a minute, if Andre didn't have the Hammond, I remember how many years ago I was fortunate enough we were able to do an interview for him for the TV show, the local TV show we did. Michelle, where you talked about the Emmy. It was a regional Emmy, so not national, but still we were grateful and we're happy. But anyway, we interviewed him and he said, people would say, "Hmm, Andre's lost his anointing because he doesn't have that Hammond." Again, like I said, when the Hammond was first introduced in the gospel, people thought that was the devil's instrument. Then you just
Mhm.
wait 20 or 30 years, and then all of a sudden it's the most sacred instrument. People hear it and they immediately think church. Well, if he didn't have it in some songs, he just said, some people say, "Mhm, he's lost his anointing. He's not saved anymore," which is so yeah, so that could be around the country that people would have those feelings about how somebody is dressed, how somebody performs. A Christian rap, that was another chapter in the book, just looking at that. And I remember that I wasn't like an immediate fan. I wasn't against it. It's just I wondered, what is it? Tim Smith, the late Tim Smith, was a great friend of mine, and I would listen to him after I got off the air, and I was like, what is he doing? And then I would, because I'm a lyrics person, and I would listen to it, and I'd call Tim and say, who is that? And then he's the one who introduced me to it. And then I just became such a fan. And people think, well, I mean, really? I'm like, yeah. I teach 20-year-olds, that's number one. And number two, so I want to know, what is it that is empowering to them or fascinating to them, or could be fascinating to them if they would just give it time. And so whether it was Lecrae when he first started, I was like, this is fabulous, you know, driving with my top down, listening to this Jesus music. Like, I am so in, you know? So when I was at WJLB, which is where I was for like 18 years, our sister station,
Right.
I would say to some people I would say to the audience and say, okay, so if you're not into this, turn your radio down for 5 minutes because I'm getting ready to go there, with Christian rap. But then there are plenty of young people, obviously, who listen to WJLB, and they would appreciate, having the sound that they were growing up with, hip hop, rap, included in gospel. And there are people who became Christians because it spoke to them that way. So whether we're talking about Thomas Dorsey, kind of giving people maybe a rhythm or a sound that spoke to them, or Edwin or Andre or Kirk or Yolanda or Mary or whatever. I appreciate that. When I tell people, while you may think that gospel has a particular sound, it does not. It has a message that is universal, but the sound
Right. Right.
vary with generations and with different individuals. We've got trap gospel. Now, is everybody a fan of trap gospel? No. But for some people, it speaks to them, because it sounds like what they like already. And so when somebody like Ty Tribbett, includes that kind of sound in what he's doing, and even when Erica Campbell, did that with was it I Love God? I think that was I Love God. People are like, oh my goodness. Well, but there are other people who liked it. Not to exclude the little kids who ran their parents crazy by repeating that line. I love God. You don't love God. What's wrong with you? Okay, so different people like different things, and
Right.
it speaks to them. That is, if they can hear that message, God loves them through that, then that works for the artist.
Right. Yeah. That's I haven't, sometimes having a few side conversations with Pastor Kenlock. That was kind of what his thought process was on introducing and having guest artists come through the church. He said he just want to get people. He want to get people to hear his message.
Yes.
If that gets him in the door, then
Mhm.
they'll hear his message, and that's where where he comes from with that perspective.
I knew he had the Judah band there, and he was saying,
Yeah.
send me a text about them, dropping it like it's hot. He said, I don't want to hear it. You know, because, well, you know what? You were talking about where did we start? We start on the African continent, but throughout the African diaspora, our MO is to move when we sing.
Yes, yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
And so these are young folks that when they dance, they really move, And he was like, don't send me any texts. I don't want to hear from you. They're singing the gospel. So,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah,
don't,
I have friends who forget about that. Like you said, diaspora of Africa, that's
mhm,
what we do. I mean, that's just our rhythm, This
where,
whole
mhm.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. So, can I ask you, I mean, I don't know if you can recall it or if there was anything involved with it, but your opportunity did you speak at the Kennedy Center? Did
Oh, I
you?
was on the panel. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did get a chance, and they recorded it. And Renee Fleming asked a question, and even though I was on the panel with a few real celebrities, they were kind of quiet. So I went on and answered the question, and that was the question that ended up as part of the TV broadcast that
All
day.
right.
Yeah, but it was so that was one of the highlights of my career in gospel music to be involved, to be invited to be a part of that that series they were doing on the American Voice, and I was glad that they included gospel because so often, even though this is music that helped to trained so many of R&B and pop singers or that they have embraced, sometimes we get left out. So I was
Right.
glad that we got included on that particular platform.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that because we do tend to forget that a lot of artists, R&B artists, come from that background or have that as a background.
But you think
Yeah.
about it, a little bit less than a year ago. Yeah, well, it's coming up on a year, I should say that way. But when the Clark Sisters movie, The First Ladies, was on, that was executive produced by Missy Elliott, Queen Latifah, and Mary J. Blige
Wow.
because they all loved the Clark Sisters and they all had such stories about how the Clark Sisters music um, had an impact on them when as they were growing up and even later, just the power of their voices, the harmonies, the lyrics, the rhythms, all of that. And so it's important for people to know that so many of their favorite R&B pop artists have enjoyed gospel music. And so you don't, I mean, we'd like for you to come on and be a part of the crew too.
Right, right, right. It's interesting because there's a website out there called everynoise.com. It's kind of sponsored by Spotify.
Okay.
And if you go there and you type in the word gospel, there are 37 different genres of gospel music out there.
Well,
If you type in worship, there's
mhm,
like 20 something
mm,
versions of it. Now, granted, they may be specific to a country, like
mhm,
Ghana gospel or
mhm.
Rwanda gospel or Latin worship or, Asia, somewhere in Asia, there's a worship. But what do you see or how do you feel about the community of uh, Christian music as it spreads across the world?
Oh, it's incredible. Right now, I'm working on a book about the song "Oh Happy Day," and while I do not intend to give away all of my, content, what I will say is
Right.
that is a song that is sung around the world, and this is 51 plus years after it was released. Okay, there are still people uh, recording versions of it or dancing to versions of it that are going viral and you go like, I'm sorry, what? Okay, and but it means great for what I'm doing. But let's say last Easter there was a Catholic priest who started dancing to it, and there was a sister who was a part of the congregation who was playing tambourine. Now, mind you, they had been in lockdown. This was one of the first Sundays where they had been open, even with social distancing. And he said normally he would just kind of do like a few little steps, but he was so happy to see what they call her tambourine Tony that he just, I mean, and when I say he danced, I don't mean like two step. I mean, it went like on Facebook, I don't know, it's like, what was like 6 million last month. And this
Oh
was
my goodness.
so I'm going to say there are plenty of these things out there. And so but around the world, I've had colleagues who know what I'm working on who sent me videos of people performing this song everywhere. Amazing. For I don't mean for like 10 people. I'm talking about for thousands of people at a time. And not just because it went viral. Sometimes they're in these huge arenas. And so, but I've also have colleagues, whereas I specifically generally look at what's going on in the United States. This one is taking me beyond that, but I have colleagues who always write about what's going on around the world, and it is around the world. Whether you talk about whether it's praise and worship or people who have adapted their own form of gospel. It's been 11, 12 years since I was in Nigeria. We were there for 3 weeks with some students, and every Sunday we were at church, and every Sunday we were hearing gospel music, filtered through the Nigerian way of moving and everything. But it was not like, oh my gosh, this is so foreign, I can't understand. It was great. We enjoyed it. And it was just beautiful to see that in Nigeria, just as being in Hamtramck, or
Right.
you know, people can express their love for God through gospel music. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. So by chance, did you have an opportunity to do your list?
Oh, let's see. You wanted a little, let me tell you, if I could just say, um, any artist that is from the D, if you will download that or buy that, that would be great. And let me tell you why I want to say that. When my book came out all these years ago, they asked me to do 5, and then I gave them 10, and still there were people who were ready to, let's say,
Lynch you.
yeah, well, I didn't use that word because I did not include them on the list. So let me say, anything that has to do with Detroit and gospel, please download that, stream it, purchase it. That would be a lovely thing. That way I can stay alive and finish this other book.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. I can deal with that.
Yes, I am really serious. It's like,
I respect that.
I can't believe you left my uncle out. And you remember what my auntie did? And how did you leave our church out? So, oh, yeah, I'm not going down that road, but thank you for asking.
Okay. All right. Well, so you mentioned that some of the things you have going forward. Are you on social media?
Yes. Mhm. I
All
don't know
right.
how you can find me. I'm there.
All right. Well, just go ahead and drop your handles so that way people can find you.
Okay. I'll tell you, most of the time I know, because I'm grown. Most of the time I'm on Facebook, but from time to time I will go to Twitter and I will go to IG. And on Facebook, well, yeah, it just says Deborah Smith Pollard, and it's Deborah spelled the long way. Mhm. So that's where you can usually find me there.
So since we don't have our list, so I have a question for you in regards to the festivals. Um, so it looks like uh, we may be losing. Well, we're threatened. I should say we're threatened to lose a whole profession of musicians. Concert venues. I mean, if this thing doesn't get around, because people have to find a way of life. I mean, if you're not one of the Kirk Franklins of the world, and you're just
Mhm,
somebody who just starting out in trying to follow your passion,
mhm,
and you're not as recognized as some of these guys, you may have to find alternative sources of income. And so you may not come back to it once you find that source. So do you, I mean, I know we don't have it probably won't happen in a year's time, but do you see yourself going back to promoting?
Oh, so right now I'm just trying to focus on the writing, and there are a couple of other things I want to do. I would love it if I could do a documentary on gospel choir directors.
Oh, okay.
It's just how you're talking about how they move, um,
Yeah.
how they pull choirs in because, if the only choir directors or conductors you've ever seen are those who are very, quiet and have very reserved hand movements, then you're not talking about the choir directors I'm talking about. You've got the big personalities and the big movements. Some of my favorites are no longer with us, but thank goodness we have, video of them. I'm talking about Jimmy Dowell, JD. Everybody called him from St. James. He was like one of my all-time favorites. But there are many others. But there are many who are still here. Michael Fletcher, my co-host Glenda Curry always talks about some 7 or 8 year old who said, "Are you going to see that man who directs with his feet?" Okay, so well, because Michael Fletcher, for all these years he's been directing, he moves when he directs, and
Right.
I just would love to do a documentary and tie what it is we do in gospel choir directing with the movement again that you and I talked about is part of what we expect in the African diaspora. We don't expect you to just stand there as if there's nothing happening, but move as if this music is about something, that you want to express the joy, the happiness that the music brings to you.
Yeah. Well, once all of this is said and done, pandemic wise,
Mhm.
I know it's a vision. I don't know if it's going to come to fruition, but I think approaching the National Endowment of Arts
Mhm.
to kickstart, the country going again,
Yes.
musically, they need to step in and fund those kind of things. Um, yeah, because I don't want to see us lose what we have here as a country. I mean, one of our main exports is music,
Mhm.
and I just hate for it to happen where we can't survive off. So if we could get maybe uh, a cross country, of artists who just go to town, exposing people to sounds that have never been heard before, like um, Zydeco and Southern gospel and contemporary gospel and just all these sounds out there that people can listen to. So I just hate for it to be missed, and
Well,
that's kind of
I
why this show is. I'm sorry, this is kind of why this show is a passion project for me. I mean, I want people to be open minded to different sounds and different things, and take it and run with it.
yes. No, I was just going to say one thing, even though everybody is, most people are a little tired of being at least semi locked down and all of that. One thing is because of social media, you can go to, as I said, YouTube or IG or whatever, and find new sounds and new performers. And so that's good. And many of them have done those so called versus, performances, Fred versus, Kirk. It wasn't really versus, it was just so many hundreds of thousands of people who were watching and enjoying them being together. But there again, if you're not Fred Hammond or Kirk Franklin, well, you probably won't have, close to 1 million people watching you in one evening. But just the fact that you can use the platform and sing or dance or both or play your instrument means that you can still express this sounds that you have in you, this whatever these new lyrics are, whatever these new combinations are, you can still express it with some kind of way, and who knows, maybe it'll go viral, and that'll be great too.
Right, right, yeah. Well, Dr. Pollard, I appreciate your time.
Well,
Thank you so much.
thank you so much for asking it. I'm glad we got a chance to, even though I didn't see you.
I love the earrings.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening. Please share and subscribe. You can listen to our show on Apple, Deezer, Google, Spotify, or on our website, music.buzzsprout.com. Remember, if it's Monday, it's Meet the Music.